Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror in film, television, books, and popular culture. Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome to another show. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I'm joined by co host and producer Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how are you?
I'm doing really good, Bruce. Feeling really good. I feel spring is in the air. How's everything going with you?
Yeah, we're both broadcasting from sunny studios today, which is a nice change of pace. Normally, we record at night. Normally, though, we record when it's a day filled with darkness, cold, and in both our places, it's sunny and warmer today. So perhaps a sign that better weather is on the way. We certainly appreciate that.
Yes.
Very much so. Well, Tracy, on this week's show, we're going to be talking about two films, one new, one not as new. We're going to be starting with the 2024 movie The Substance, which has been nominated for Best Picture at this year's Academy Awards, taking place the first weekend, the first Sunday in March. And then later in the show, we're going to talk about an older film, one that came out 50 years ago this month. It's the great made-for-TV movie, The Legend of Lizzie Borden, starring Elizabeth Montgomery. So those are the two films we're going to focus in on. But before we get to those two movies, let's begin, Tracy, by doing a bit of an Oscars overview for horror this year. And this is actually a good year for horror at the Academy Awards because four different movies have received nominations in a variety of categories. Let's start with Alien Romulus, which is, of course, both horror and sci-fi. It's received a nomination for Best Visual Effects. Then you've got an international movie, one that I have not seen, called The Girl with the Needle, and that has received a nomination for Best International Feature. Then you've got the film that both of us love, Nosferatu. It has received a total of 4 nominations. That includes Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyle, and also Best Production Design. And then the fourth and final film, which is the only one nominated for Best Picture, is The Substance. Also received nominations for Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Makeup and Hairstyling. And Demi Moore has been nominated for Best Actress for her role in the film.
Oh,
So
wow.
in terms of the Oscars, The Substance is really the dominant film, even though I happen to feel that there are other movies that maybe are a bit more deserving, but we'll talk more about that as we proceed. Tracy, if we look at the history of the Academy Awards, and these awards go back to 1929, only 6 prior horror films, prior to this year with The Substance, only 6 have ever been nominated for Best Picture. We're going to talk about those. So we start with 1973. It took a while for the Academy Awards to even nominate a horror film. And this, of course, is a classic, The Exorcist. It ended up losing to a great movie, certainly, The Sting, although I guess you can debate whether maybe The Exorcist was a bit better. But hey, at least The Exorcist got nominated, something that horror film had never done before that. Then we have 2 years later, we have Jaws from 1975. So it is nominated for the Academy Award the following year. Of course, the Academy Awards always follow by a year. So a film comes out in 75, then the Academy Awards take place in 76. That's one thing you have to remember here. Jaws was nominated. You could make a really strong argument. It's an absolute classic that it should have won. It ended up losing to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I could have seen losing to Dog Day Afternoon, the Al Pacino movie, which I think is terrific too. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's a great film. I would have picked Jaws over that, but hey, it's 50 years ago. Can't correct it now. Then it's another 16 years before we see another horror film nominated. And this is the only one that would win Best Picture. And that, of course, Silence of the Lambs with Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster, the only one to emerge victorious. And it swept a lot of the major awards. Hopkins got Best Actor, Jodie Foster got Best Actress. It won some other significant awards as well. Then we have a wait for another 8 years. Another one of my favorites, The Sixth Sense, gets nominated, 1999 film. So it goes up for the Academy Award consideration in 2000, loses to American Beauty with Kevin Spacey. Then we have another wait, 11 years, Black Swan. And this is the only one of these films I've never seen. Have you seen Black Swan, by the way?
No, I haven't, but I've heard really good things about it.
Yeah. It's gotten excellent reviews over the years, but it did end up losing to another movie called The King's Speech. And then you had the film from 2017, which I really felt should have won, but it didn't. And that's the Jordan Peele directed movie Get Out.
Mhm.
And it ended up losing to The Shape of Water. Some have called that a horror film. I don't think it really is. It's more fantasy drama. I would not consider that a horror film. So, of these previous six films, five of the six ended up falling short. The only one that was a winner, Silence of the Lambs. And Tracy, if you think about it, only six horror films prior to this year ever nominated for Best Picture. Let's think about all the horror films that came out from 1929 on. Great movies that were never nominated for Best Picture. And I'm just going to rack up a few here. Frankenstein, the original from 1931. The wonderful sequel, Bride of Frankenstein, which a lot of people feel is the best of the Universal classics. Then you have the great film from RKO with Boris Karloff, The Body Snatcher. That was never nominated. Psycho. This is hard to believe. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960, not nominated for the Oscars for the Best Picture. Another great Hitchcock film comes out in 63, The Birds. It's not nominated at the 64 awards. Another all-time favorite of mine, Rosemary's Baby, came out in 1968, not nominated somehow. Then you move on to the 1970s. You have The Omen, which is a great film, terrifying movie with Gregory Peck, Lee Remick. No nomination for Best Picture. Then the John Carpenter classic, Halloween. No nomination for that. Before the end of the decade, you've got Alien, horror, sci-fi, considered one of the great combination horror sci-fi films ever. No nomination for that. We then move into the 80s. Poltergeist, that got shut out. Aliens, which I think is actually even better than Alien. We could debate that. No nomination for Aliens. Another great movie, I think it came out in 1990. Stephen King adaptation, Misery. No nomination for Best Picture. And then finally, we think about 2024 and the film that we both really enjoyed, the new Nosferatu, not nominated for Best Picture, though it was nominated in some of the other categories. So as we can see, the history of the Academy Awards, not very favorable toward horror, even though this year's Academy Awards taking on a little bit of a different tenor.
Mhm.
Tracy, let's now talk about the substance. This is now the seventh horror movie to be nominated for Best Picture. It came out September of 2024. So, for those not familiar, the story centers on famous actress and hostess Elizabeth Sparkle, played by longtime actress Demi Moore. And Elizabeth Sparkle is a famous Hollywood personality, an Academy Award winning actress. She's got a star on the Walk of Fame. At this point in her career, she's the host of a daily workout show that's incredibly popular. But on her 50th birthday, she is let go because the show's producer, played by Dennis Quaid, considers her too old. 50 is like the magic number or the reverse of a magic number. You turn 50 as an actress, they want to get rid of you. That's been a bromide in Hollywood for many, many years.
Mhm.
Now, although Elizabeth lives in a beautiful apartment, very wealthy, she's had this successful career. She apparently has no friends. We don't really see any friends in the movie, and she has no family to speak of either. With her exercise show now being taken away from her, she has little left to do but to look in the mirror at what she considers her aging body and face. Then, shortly thereafter, she crashes her car. She's taken to a local hospital. And the doctor, somewhat surprised, tells her, "You've suffered no real injuries. You're fine." But before she leaves the hospital, a young nurse slips her a flash drive. It has an advertisement for a black market drug, which is known as the substance, kind of a mysterious name. And this drug promises to unveil a new and better you. So Elizabeth contemplates whether she should try to buy this product, see if it might help. She ends up calling the company and she decides, yeah, I'm going to buy the product. She is then told to go to one of the seediest areas of Los Angeles, a really lousy neighborhood. And there she has to use a swipe card to gain access to this very small door that lifts up from the bottom. And it only goes about a quarter of the way up. So she literally has to crawl into this thing. And there inside of this crazy, almost like trap door, she finds a room with all these lockers. And there's a locker with a number matching the number that she has. And inside the locker is the package known as the substance. So she goes home, she follows the instructions, of which there are many. She injects herself with this miracle drug. And almost immediately, it results in her writhing on the floor. And right then and there, she should have known there was a problem. Things get worse, though. Her back literally splits open, and a new body emerges from the back. Well, this new body, played by a much younger actress, Margaret Qualley, is basically a younger version of Elizabeth by about 30 years. Big difference. But there's a catch. She can only occupy the new body for 7 days, while the older Elizabeth literally lies on the bathroom floor with a feeding tube strapped to her. And then after 7 days, she must switch bodies. She has to switch back to the old body. So the new body becomes unconscious for the next 7 days, and the new body is strapped to this feeding tube. And this process will need to be repeated over and over again, and it cannot be deviated from at all. That's the warning that comes with the instructions. Well, the younger body, which is renamed Sue by Elizabeth for whatever reason, she ends up auditioning for her old job as the host of that exercise show. And of course, with her beautiful looks, well-proportioned body, Sue naturally wins the audition. Nobody knows that this is the younger version of herself. People think this is a completely different person. And now this new young Sue embarks on a second phase, if you will, of fame and stardom. Well, then a problem comes up. Eventually, Sue starts to cheat. She extends the 7-day window by a few hours. And then after doing this, she resumes life as the older Elizabeth, because remember, they have to keep the 7-day rotation going.
Mhm.
So when she is back to being the older Elizabeth, she notices that one of her fingers has become old and almost deformed. It isn't just aged, but it's almost mangled. So kind of learns right then and there that if you deviate even by a little bit from this 7-day plan, bad things are going to happen. Unfortunately, though, Sue continues the cheating because it doesn't affect her, even though, well, they keep telling her that you're not two separate people, you're still one person. But Sue doesn't look at it that way. She extends the 7-day window, not by hours or minutes, but eventually by days. And that leads to progressively horrific changes in Elizabeth's body. So when Elizabeth calls up the company and complains that Sue is cheating the process, the mysterious man answering the phone says that Elizabeth should not be referring to Sue as she, as if she were another person. No, he tells her, says, Elizabeth, you and Sue are one. You're one and the same. He also tells Elizabeth there is no way to reverse, I should say, the negative changes happening to your body. In the meantime, the younger version, Sue, becomes more successful. Ratings for the exercise show go through the roof. And eventually she's offered the chance to host the network's New Year's Eve special. Well, she continues to cheat the process, and this leads to horrible, terrible consequences for pretty much everybody involved. So that is the basic storyline for this 2024 film, The Substance. And it's a film that I found interesting up to a point. So, Tracy, first question I have for you. What were you thinking as you're watching the film for about the first hour and 45 minutes, first hour and 50 minutes? Forget
Ugh.
about the last 30 minutes or so. Think about the first hour, 45 minutes. What'd you think of the movie up until then?
I have so many thoughts about this movie, Bruce. I don't even know where to start. Um, I totally get that concept of the film. Like, before I even watched it, I had seen trailers and stuff, and, honestly, it was one of those movies that I didn't know if I really wanted to watch it or not, so I kind of avoided it.
Mhm.
That sounds terrible. The movie's received some really good ratings, nominated for Best Picture, and I really like Demi Moore. She was in like The Seventh Sign, Ghost, St. Elmo's Fire. So she's like really great, and I found the concept really intriguing. I mean, really, who doesn't want to have like, this magic cure to be one's best self? Like that's totally awesome.
Right.
Um, like I don't want to go down a weird tangent, but like as I watched this movie, I felt myself getting into Elizabeth's head. So, like, there's so many women over the age of 40. They hear the same things, over and over again, both in like personal life and business life, or they don't feel adequate because, society says, you need to be something different. You need to be somebody different. You need to be younger and prettier, dye those gray hairs, wear this, don't wear that, smile. And, always wondering, like, did I miss out on that opportunity because, I'm a little bit older? And, just a whole range of emotions like that because, like, society is so biased, and I find it's becoming really quite judgmental. So I really felt for Elizabeth in this movie, and I totally get why she felt there was no other option rather than take a chance on this mysterious substance. Now, granted, like, the substance is pretty sketchy on where she went to obtain it, and then just randomly injects herself with, like, this bright fluid. And, I was really curious to see how it was all gonna work out. And, I quickly saw that Sue was starting to take advantage of extending her stay, I guess, while Elizabeth was kind of, like, barricaded away. The first hour and 45 minutes, wasn't really that bad. It was quite good. I really thought the storyline was wonderful. I did feel that a lot of the scenes could have been a little bit shorter and tightened up just a bit to shrink the length of the long movie. But what's so funny, Bruce, is there was like a moment when Elizabeth was offered to put a stop to the process, but like it was like an addiction for her.
Mhm.
And no matter what terrible changes were happening, like you mentioned with the finger and other changes to her body as a result of Sue stealing this time, she just couldn't stop. She was totally addicted to it. But, you know, I thought it was really interesting. But an hour and 45 minutes at that point, I was really more than ready to have the conclusion for the story.
Yeah.
So I did appreciate the storyline.
What'd you think about the scene when she goes to that really seedy neighborhood and she has to, like, literally crawl into this entrance? Did it feel like this is an illegal drug deal here?
Well, first of all, I wanna say I loved her yellow jacket throughout this movie. I have to say that. But, it was, like, quite the area, and I couldn't tell, like, did she pay for this substance? Like, how expensive was it? It was on, like, this weird area, but then when she crawled underneath the barricade and into this, like, big, beautiful, sterile room to grab her substance, it was so weird.
Mhm.
And, like, is this something that everybody knows about or just select people? And, I think the biggest thing was, like, how much does that cost?
Yeah, they never
So
specify. You
no,
just have to assume it's probably pretty expensive.
I would think so. Yeah, I would definitely think so.
Although in retrospect, given how things worked out, probably shouldn't have spent the money. We'll talk
No.
about that later. Let's talk, Tracy, about the characters in the film. And really, for a film that's very long, there are only three substantive characters
Mhm.
that we get to know in any kind of depth. So we start with Elizabeth, who is played very well by Demi Moore, and I can understand her getting a nomination for Best Actress. She portrays Elizabeth as generally a likable person, despite the fact that she's very famous and wealthy. And you kind of feel sorry for her because despite the fame, the money, the stature, she's a lonely character, no friends, no family. She's generally polite to the people that work with her at the television studio. On the day that she turns 50, several people wish her a happy birthday and she thanks them for that. She doesn't treat them dismissively. Interestingly, Elizabeth in the movie is supposed to be 50 years old. When we see her at that first workout session on TV, that's the day she turns 50. But at the time of the filming, Demi Moore was actually closer to 60. I think she was 59 at that point.
Right.
So she's actually 9 years older than the age in the film. And I'll tell you what, I'm looking at Demi Moore and I thought she looks pretty darn good in this movie.
Mhm.
Her character looks good, despite Elizabeth thinking otherwise. Elizabeth concentrates on the aging features, but all things considered, she looks pretty darn good to me for 50 years of age or for 60 years of age. Take your pick of either one. So you've got Elizabeth, who I think is the more likable of the two characters, even though physically she's not as attractive as the younger body. So that brings us to the character of Sue, who is, well, an offshoot of Elizabeth. And if you believe the people that are marketing the product, the substance, Elizabeth and Sue are essentially one person. They're the same. But Elizabeth decides that when I'm the younger body, I'm going to be Sue. I'm going to be a totally different person. And Sue is played by a different actress. It's not like they took Demi Moore and used special effects to make her look 30 years younger. They take a
Mhm.
young American actress, Margaret Qualley, and there's no question that Sue is beautiful. She, has this great body, and she's going to be very popular as the leader of the exercise show. But in terms of personality, I find her totally unlikable, shallow personality, very selfish. And really, she's the one who regards the older Elizabeth with contempt. Now, later in the movie, you'll see some contempt from Elizabeth towards Sue, but it really starts with Sue being the antagonistic one in terms of the attitude. So she looks at the older Elizabeth as someone who is a burden. She doesn't want to spend 7 days in that body anymore. She'd rather spend all her time in the body, the younger body of Sue. Qualley, I think, handles this role well. This is a role that, the young, beautiful actress, maybe a bit of a diva. She could have played it in an over the top, campy fashion, but she avoids the trap of doing that. So I
Mhm.
thought she did a pretty solid job in playing this character. Then that brings us to the third character, and that is Harvey, the network executive. And he is played by Dennis Quaid. Well, Harvey is an absolutely preposterous figure, start to finish. He's loud, he's obnoxious, he has disgusting eating habits. There's a scene early in the film where he's having dinner with Elizabeth, eating shrimp, a lot of close-ups. I mean, it's nauseating to watch. Harvey is also consumed with youth, beauty, and he has no real regard for other people and their thoughts, their considerations, what they might actually need. Now, it's interesting to note that this role was supposed to be played by another actor, and that actor is the late Ray Liotta. He was supposed to play the character of Harvey. He had signed up to do it, but then he died somewhat unexpectedly shortly before filming. So, with Liotta having passed away relatively surprisingly, relatively young age.
Mhm.
The producers had to find another actor. They chose Quaid, and I like Quaid. He's a very good actor. He's done some terrific films along the way. But I really think Leota would have been a much better fit for this outlandish, overbearing character. I could have seen Leota playing this almost in a Goodfellas type fashion, the way that his character of Henry Hill was, especially toward the second half of that movie, when he's losing his temper and his ego has gotten out of control. I could see Leota, if he took that approach, being just about a perfect fit
Mhm.
for the role. Quaid, for me, it just didn't work. I didn't find it believable. It was almost a caricature. It was just too over the top. So those are the three main characters: Elizabeth, Sue, Harvey. Let's get your thoughts, Tracy, on each of them.
Oh my gosh. I think Demi Moore really excelled in this role. Um, Honestly, personally, I'm really kind of surprised that she took on a role like this. She's so talented, don't get me wrong, but recently she's faced some kind of like public scrutiny from tabloids and social media platforms just about her physical appearance, plastic surgery she may or may not have had, medication she may or may not be taking, and it's just, you know, I'm just really surprised that she took on a role kinda like that. But, Demi Moore brought a huge sense of humanity to this character. She made Elizabeth so relatable to many, many women. She was raw, she was vulnerable, and it just she played it super intense. She had such a wide range of emotions and, the prosthetics throughout the movie that she would have had to go through, just phenomenal. And I just think she did really, really well. Um, Margaret Qualley as Sue, I thought she was really great. I've never seen her in anything before, I don't think. So this was kind of like the first time I've seen her performance.
Yeah.
I think she did excellent. The actual character, like you mentioned, she wasn't really totally likable in the beginning. Um, and as the film progressed, I was just kind of like waiting and waiting and waiting for her to kind of get some payback for what she was up to.
Yeah.
um, but
I thought she was disgusting, her personality.
it really
Really?
was. It was really off, but she did a really good job with it.
Oh, yeah.
And again, like Margaret, the actual actress, she's young and she's upcoming, and she does have multiple credits behind her, and I'm sure she's going to have many upcoming roles. And I think her performance in this film will go a long way because I think she did an excellent job. And I love Dennis Quaid. His character Harvey, I did not love Harvey, not one little bit. I thought he was icky and yucky and disturbing. And, the scenes with him eating and laughing and smoking in slow-mo, that really did me in, honestly. He was made out to be that walking stereotypical guy from the 70s or the 80s Hollywood era, the good old boys club in general, just icky. But Dennis Quaid was awesome and he pulled it off so well. He gave me a laugh or two throughout this film, but honestly, I really wanted him to choke on that shrimp or that cigarette. But, I think they did really, really great. I think, Demi Moore is really deserving of her nomination for Best Actress. Like, I think she did amazing.
Yeah. How about that suit Dennis Quaid wore in the opening scene when he goes into the men's room?
Dear. Yeah, not so great.
Yeah. This brings up a question for me, Tracy. I don't think they ever specify the year this is all happening.
No, they
And
didn't.
you look at the fashions, what Quaid was wearing as Harvey,
Mhm.
that would lead you to believe maybe it's 1970s. But then I'm trying to think, does anybody end up using a cell phone in the movie?
I don't really know.
I don't
The
remember anyone using a phone. They might have.
the whole exercise videos is, like, kind of blasé, like, it's kind of, like, old school,
Yeah,
and
1980s almost.
I would think it would be the '80s, like, the
Yeah,
colors of the outfits, the music was, pretty dated in the movie. I would kind of place it somewhere, like, in the '80s, I would
yeah,
think. That's what it felt like to me.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't remember anybody specifying or any markers that would have said, "Yeah, it's definitely this year."
No.
But yeah, I guess '80s would be the best guess as to when the time period, would have been. Maybe they kept it intentionally vague. Maybe that was a
Yeah.
choice made by the director. And let's talk about the director of the film. Her name is Coralie Farja, and, she's a French director.
Mhm.
Obviously, with this movie, Farja is trying to say something about how we view the process of aging, how we're obsessed with it as a country, how Hollywood is obsessed with the age, particularly of actresses. I think to a lesser extent with male actors, but
Mm.
more so with actresses. Also, I think there's a statement being made by Farja here about decisions we make as younger people and how they can very much take a toll on our older selves. Because the root of many of the problems in this movie is the younger Sue. The fact that she's trying to cheat the process, trying to extend that 7-day window, first by a few minutes, then hours, then days. She's the one who creates the mess, really more than anything. And it's this mistake in not following those instructions that creates difficulties for when the character takes on the older body of Elizabeth. So now the older body has to pay for the sins of the younger body. And you can see definitely a statement about how people, especially younger people, might, abuse themselves, too much partying, too much alcohol, too much drugs, which is not to say that older people don't make these same mistakes.
Mhm.
But a lot of times you'll see with, especially with famous actors and actresses, they'll talk about how they were in their younger days and they lived kind of a wild life. And then they eventually, at some point, do settle down and they start to realize, this is not the way to live. They can't keep the pace up. They have to make some changes. So I think that's part of the lesson here. Also, I think the movie is kind of saying, we really can be our own worst enemies. Because if you believe what the producers of the substance are saying, that Elizabeth and Sue are one person, they are one, they are not separate entities, even though we might think they are. If we do look at them as one entity, one body, yeah, you're your own worst enemy. The
Mhm.
way that you act, especially in the short term, can have a real effect on what happens to you in the long term. So I think that's part of what's being said. There's a lot of different messages that you can infer from the film, and I think all of them probably have a legitimate basis. Now, when you look at this movie, and really for me, as we've sort of hinted at earlier, you take the first hour and 50 minutes. You take that as one part of the movie, and then the last 30 to 40 minutes, you take that as the second part. And it's almost two different films. If Farja had ended this film at that hour and 50-minute mark, come up with a quicker resolution, I would have felt a lot better about The Substance. I would have felt it was a much stronger movie. But the film drags on for another 30 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. It's banging away at these same themes. We've already figured out these themes, these lessons that are coming from the script. We know it, but it just bangs away repeatedly over and over. And for me, it just descends into ridiculousness and silliness. And there is a monstrous figure. I don't want to give away too much here, but this monstrous figure almost looks like a cross between the Elephant Man and the Fly. And in some ways, it's more an attempt at comedy than it is true horror. And I know that a lot of this film is supposed to be dark comedy, but I didn't find it funny at all, Tracy. I just found it
Mhm.
nonsensical and almost kind of sad. What'd you think of that?
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I was really surprised. I kind of was in shock when they kind of flipped the script, I guess,
Mhm.
and did such an ending like that. Like, I just It was not. I personally didn't find it suitable at all. Like, it was just way over the top, just a little too much over the top for me. It
It's
didn't
like
make any
Lloyd
sense.
Kaufman came in and directed the last 20 minutes of the movie. Let's make this as outrageous as possible, which fits for a Lloyd Kaufman movie,
Mhm.
not for an Academy Award nominated film.
And that's exactly kind of like my confusion is, you know yeah, it's just kind of my confusion as to how it could be 2 different movies in one, and this was the film that was selected to be put on the docket as an award-winning film. So, yeah, it was very bizarre, very bizarre.
Yeah. So if we look at just the first hour and 50 minutes, just that part of the movie,
Mhm,
I think it was a good movie for that part. However, it was certainly, in my opinion, not a film worthy of being nominated for the Academy Award. There were many other films, and we've talked about a number of them on this very show that came out in 2024 that were better than this one. I mean, Nosferatu, which we love, miles better than this, in my opinion, not even
mhm,
close. Late Night with the Devil, that was another movie we both liked a lot, much better than The Substance. Long Legs with Nicolas Cage, now available on Hulu, by the way. In my mind, clearly better than The Substance. If you're going to nominate a horror film, which, and I love the fact that a horror film did get nominated. I think that's good for the genre. I think it's good for people that love to watch these kind of movies. But if you're going to nominate a horror film from 2024, which was a very strong year in the genre,
mhm.
all three of these films, and there probably are others too that deserve to be nominated ahead of The Substance. I'm not sure exactly why they picked The Substance. Maybe they felt this was sort of a reward for Demi Moore for, a nice career. She's been doing films now for like 40 years, since the 1980s. Um, Maybe there was some political thing that was playing a part in this. I'm not exactly sure why the Academy decided to go in this direction. But clearly, in my opinion, Nosferatu, which is a beautifully shot, beautifully executed film, was the one that most deserved to be nominated for Best Picture. And the fact that it wasn't, frankly, tells us that the Academy really doesn't know what it's doing, especially when it comes to horror films. So they made a mistake here in my mind, and they've been making a lot of these mistakes in recent years. So when I look at The Substance, I think it's a pretty good movie. I'm going to give it 3 stars. I think that's a little bit generous given the wreck that happened over the last half hour. I mean, it really just descended into nonsense and madness. But I'm gonna try to forget about that. I'll give it 3 stars
Mm.
and let it lay there. So that's my thoughts. What do you say, Tracy? Final thoughts on the movie, what's your ranking for it?
Bruce, if we weren't
Mm.
going to be discussing this movie for the podcast, I can say that I wouldn't have watched it. I can tell you for certain it was not on my watch list,
Mhm,
and, I would never just randomly put it on. Do I regret watching it? No, and yes, maybe a little bit. It's a good storyline, believe it or not. It's a ton of social commentary, like we've already talked about. It was crammed into this film, and it makes you think. But
mhm.
man, that ending, not what I was expecting to see. And I still can't grasp why they did it like that. Um, the last moments before the credits rolled, though, was super sad because it kind of like ended where the movie started, which
Mhm.
was that Walk of Fame image. So it was kind of a little bit, you know, sad in a way.
Yeah.
Um, I'd give it 3 stars as well. It's worth a watch. People should keep in mind that it's like, what, 2.5 hours long, roughly? Too long for me. You take the ending with a grain of salt just because it's so bizarre. And I don't even know, like, to be honest, if I would class this as a horror film. I mean, the majority felt more sci-fi-ish to me,
Mm.
except for the last half hour was definitely horror.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess like the body horror type throughout the film, but it had like a real sci-fi concept to me just because, it's a science experiment really,
Mhm.
that kind of a thing. So I felt it was definitely more on a sci-fi level. Um, the last half hour definitely put me in shock, and I think it would put the audience in shock too. Well, it was delving into Elizabeth's transformation, I guess, and, her eventual acceptance of her image and, you know, she didn't really care about what society thought about her anymore. She
Mhm.
just kind of went out there as she was, and then did what she did. But, you know, I think she was done and she was at peace. She was trying to show the audience that she was still that same person on the inside, didn't matter what she looked like on the outside.
Mm.
I think they coulda handled the ending a little bit better, and I'll be honest, at one point, I thought maybe the writer might have backtracked a bit and ended it in the manner that, "Hey, this was just a dream, and Elizabeth really didn't take the substance." Like, that's kind of
Yeah.
where I thought it was going because it was just so outlandish in the end. So, that's where I thought it was going, but, it didn't. Regardless, it'll get a 3 from me. Huge social commentary and, definitely a shocker for the brain, I would say.
There's no doubt that this is a body horror film, and when you talk
Yeah,
about body horror, you talk
mhm,
about the work of David Cronenberg.
that's
Here's
right.
the problem, when you try to take body horror and make it into comedy,
Mm,
that is a hard transition to handle.
yeah,
I look at Cronenberg's movies, maybe I'm missing something, maybe there's been some that have had dark comedy, dark humor, but for the most part, they're not like that,
no,
and when you try to take body horror and try to make it funny, it's difficult to pull off, and this to me, this movie was not funny,
no.
even though they were trying to be at various times, especially in the last half hour when it just goes extreme and over the top. So that's difficult. When you do try to be funny and you're not funny, that is one of the worst results in entertainment.
Mhm,
Sometimes when you try to be serious, make a dramatic film, and you fall short of it, it's still not that bad. When you're trying to be funny and it's not funny and you're not getting the laughs, it really falls flat and it can
mhm,
become somewhat of a disaster. I don't think it went that far here, but clearly the film it needed a better finish. It needed to be done with more quickly.
mhm,
The director, the writers decided to go in a different direction. So we each give it 3 stars, and we each feel that this is really not a film that deserved to be nominated among the 10 best films. Not to say that I would be rooting against it or anything like that, but I just think that if the Academy wanted to get something from horror, they could have found something a lot better with Long Legs, Late Night with the Devil, Nosferatu, even a movie that you didn't like, but I did, Salem's Lot. I think that's a better movie. And we know that's not an Academy Award winning film, but I think that could have been a
exactly.
better film to be nominated.
Oh dear. Yeah, I really think that they could have come up with something just, a little bit better to add to that docket. I'm really quite surprised. But don't get me wrong, like I said, Demi Moore does deserve the best actress nod because she did do really well. Just yeah, they could have just tightened up the movie and changed the ending a little bit. But
All right, very good, Tracy.
yeah.
Those are our thoughts on the 2024 film, The Substance. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll go back in time 50 years to a very good made for television movie, came out in 1975, starring the beloved actress Elizabeth Montgomery. We're going to talk about the legend of Lizzie Borden when we return on the Ghostly Gallery. We are back on the Ghostly Gallery podcast talking about films from 2024 and also a film from 50 years ago, 1975 film The Legend of Lizzie Borden. This is another movie that very prominently features a female lead, but that's about where the similarities end with regard to The Legend of Lizzie Borden versus the substance. So, Legend of Lizzie Borden came out February of 1975. It's hard to believe, 50 years ago. I do remember when this movie was first seen on television. It actually debuted on ABC. It was February 10th of 1975, so it was dead of winter. It's really one of the few made-for-TV horrors of that era that deals with a real-life story, as opposed to the fictional stories we so often see in films like Satan's School for Girls, Salem's Lot, Crowhaven Farm. Most of these are clearly fictional tales, but this movie is based on a very real, very tragic real-life incident. So I first watched the movie years and years ago. I don't think I saw it that first night. I would have only been 9. I don't think my parents would have permitted that viewing. I think they would have insisted I was in bed by that time. But I did see it not that long after on television. And then I didn't see it for a long time until 2023, 2 years ago. That was the second time I watched The Legend of Lizzie Borden. I remembered it from that first viewing, probably in the early 80s, as a very good movie. And then upon further review, when I watch it the second time, well, it was even better. As an adult, I like to think I have a little better ability to analyze, judge a film, hopefully, and it's even better than I remember. So for those not familiar with the film, The Legend of Lizzie Borden is a stylized retelling of the events of 1892 in Fall River, Massachusetts. The film begins with Bridget Sullivan, the maid who works for the wealthy Borden family, frantically searching the neighborhood looking for help after something really bad has happened in the house. A neighbor, Mrs. Churchill, notices the commotion, so she goes to the Borden front door, and there she is met by Lizzie Borden, played by Elizabeth Montgomery, and Lizzie tells her rather calmly that her father, Andrew, has been killed. The way that she says it, very strange. She's not frantic. She's not yelling, screaming. She's very calm, very odd reaction. Well, after entering the house and noticing that Lizzie's stepmother, Abby, is missing from the scene, Mrs. Churchill and Bridget eventually go upstairs, and that's where they find Mrs. Borden's body on the second floor. She is also dead. She's also been killed in a very blood-ridden scene. Now, Lizzie's sister, Emma, is summoned to come home from a visit with friends. And when she meets with Lizzie at the house, she asks her point blank if you're the one who murdered their father. Lizzie, really without hesitation, says no. She denies having anything to do with it. Later, she is given a sedative before she answers questions from the police about the situation. Eventually, Lizzie Borden is charged with the murders and put on trial. And during the trial, we have a series of flashbacks. We see what life was like in this Borden house, where Andrew really ruled with an iron fist. I mean, the father was extremely tough, really unreasonable in many ways. Eventually, Lizzie is acquitted, but we do see flashbacks to the actual murders. And the way that the flashbacks portray it, those murders have clearly been committed by Lizzie Borden. She commits them while she's fully naked. She's taken all her clothes off, then washes off the blood after applying the axe to each of her parents, the father and the stepmother. So that's basically what occurs in the movie. Much of it is factually accurate. They do take liberties, though, with the flashback. We don't know if Lizzie Borden really committed the murder. She was acquitted in real life. But if you look at the film and you believe the flashbacks, that's a different story entirely. Tracy, I'm curious what you thought of the decision here by the director, Paul Wenkos, To show Lizzie Borden as clearly being the killer, he could have left this vague. But instead, the flashbacks, if they're not just hallucinations, if they're real flashbacks, the flashbacks paint an entirely different picture that, yeah, Lizzie Borden's the killer. What do you think of that decision?
So honestly, I didn't really know much about the Lizzie Borden story, except for that old nursery rhyme or whatever from school about, the 40 wax and all that. So I didn't really know that there was other suspects involved. So, the story made me do a little bit of research on the history. And from what I read, the movie would have been fairly accurate as it was presented from the take that she was the murderer, and it didn't delve into any other suspects. So, you know, I thought it was kind of interesting. The flashbacks really worked for me to kind of like put that whole story into perspective. So, I always just automatically thought she killed her parents. So I wasn't aware there were additional suspects out there.
Mhm.
But I thought it was really well done. I appreciated having kind of like that little history lesson, and those flashbacks really kind of put the pieces together for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's a good point. When you think about suspects, the way the film portrays the stepmother and father, they're really unlikable people.
Mhm.
Father more so, but the mother's not that likable either. And you could see where maybe a lot of different people might have wanted to do them in. So that does create a little bit of doubt, even though I guess in general, people seem to think that Lizzie Borden was the killer. I think, Tracy, a large part of the credit for this film, maybe 80% of the credit, if we can give it a percent, goes to Elizabeth Montgomery, who delivers a great performance playing the title character accused of committing these murders in the 1890s. Only 3 years before this film, Elizabeth Montgomery finished that long run as the wholesome witch Samantha Stevens on Bewitched. It's one of the most beloved sitcoms of all time. Elizabeth Montgomery was the star of the film, very likable character. She was really the semblance of reason, in a family where you had all these witches and warlocks that had a lot of strange habits, strange ideas. You had a mother-in-law who could never get the husband's name right. She was always misnaming Darren, calling him Durwood and Dunkwood and all this other nonsense. And Darren, the two actors who played Darren, especially the first actor, Dick York, played him as kind of a little bit of a wacky, compulsive guy. But as Samantha Stevens, Elizabeth Montgomery was really the rock of the show. She was funny, but she was also a stable voice of reason. And she really became associated with a good, wholesome character.
Mhm.
So here's just a few years later, she's asked to do diametrically opposite. She portrays a character who's as different from Samantha Stevens as could possibly be. Steely eyes, harsh exterior, rarely smiles, generally a cold-blooded aura that comes from Lizzie Borden. And I think Montgomery plays Borden to perfection for this film's purpose, and it really gives us a sample of the remarkable range that she had as an actress. Some people doubted whether she could pull this off. She showed no, she could easily do this. She could handle a serious, dramatic, unlikable role as well as a comic, favorable role like Samantha. And we should note that Montgomery was actually nominated for Best Lead Actress for the Emmys in
Oh, wow.
1976. She didn't win, but she was nominated. Now, here's another interesting note. At the time the film debuted in 1975, it wasn't known that Liz Montgomery was actually related to Lizzie Borden. That came out later. People found out that Montgomery and Lizzie Borden were sixth cousins once removed. I mean, what a coincidence that was. Both of them descended from a 17th century Massachusetts resident named John Luther. So that's just an interesting footnote. Montgomery clearly stands out. She's the key player in the film. She carries it. But the supporting cast is also very good, very accomplished. We have Ed Flanders, who would later gain fame as the kindly Dr. Westfall on St. Elsewhere, So he plays the unflinching prosecuting attorney, Hosea Knowlton. Then you've got the longtime actor, Fritz Weaver, who plays Lizzie's exacting father, Andrew. And this guy is, dictatorial, stern, unyielding. There's a scene where he comes down for breakfast and he asks, "What's on tap for breakfast?" And the maid says something like toast or pancakes.
Mhm.
And Andrew instead is focused on the mutton broth, which they've eaten for about the last 5 days running. And this mutton broth is horrible. It has flies in it. It looks moldy. Just looking at it in the film makes you want to retch. And just to show you how wacko this guy is, as well as being mean, he wants to eat the mutton broth for about the sixth consecutive day. And the maid even says to him, "It's not fit for human consumption." Well, it doesn't matter to Andrew. Let's have some more of that delicious mutton broth with the flies in it. Let's eat that for another breakfast. Gives you an idea of what his character was like. So Fritz Weaver's great in that role. Then you have Catherine Hellman. She plays Lizzie's sister. Does very well in that role. It's a smaller role, but still important. Fionnuala Flanagan handles the role of the Borden's maidservant, Bridget Sullivan. By the way, Bridget is the only other person who was in the Borden's house at the time of the murders. And she was the one who's frantically running around the neighborhood trying to find help when she realizes that Andrew Borden has been killed. Also, a couple other people in the cast. Bonnie Bartlett, another St. Elsewhere alumni, and Hayden Rourke. Some of you might remember Hayden Rourke. He played the role of Dr. Bellows on I Dream of Jeannie in the 1960s. That was a great character and a great job that he did. So, top to bottom, this is a terrific cast, at least in my opinion. Want to get your thoughts on it, Tracy. What do you think of the key players here?
First of all, I had no idea Elizabeth Montgomery was related to Lizzie Borden, so that's really super cool.
Yeah.
I thought Elizabeth Montgomery was excellent. And, I don't think I've seen any of her other projects except for Bewitched, which I absolutely adored. This role was just so different, nothing like Samantha Stevens. Like you mentioned, she was stone cold ice, but at times you couldn't help but feel sorry for her. So I really do feel that she added again, like that humanity type level to that character instead of just being like what you read in books and that nursery rhyme. You felt sorry for her. And, I've always been a fan of Elizabeth Montgomery, so I do really like her. Now Bonnie Bartlett, the lady that you mentioned, I recognized her in the film, but I wasn't sure from where until after I saw the credits roll. Um, she's definitely a really great actress, and she just has so many credits behind her. And she's married to TV icon William Daniels,
Yep.
I believe, from Saint Elsewhere, and also Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World. Um, she also played the iconic role of Linnea in Stargate.
Oh,
And
really? Okay.
yeah, and she kind of granted an interview to David Reed from Dial the Gate. And she did two fantastic interviews with him about her long career, including a deep dive into her new book. And it's a memoir called Middle of the Rainbow. And man, she's so interesting to listen to. And again, she did a really great job. And she's 95 years old and she's still going strong. Um, the guy that played Lizzie's dad, instant dislike for him.
Yeah.
And Catherine Hellman, I don't know why I didn't place her, but she's another icon, and
Yeah.
she was really great too.
What'd you think of the mutton broth?
The mutton broth, I almost choked. Oh, it was terrible. I was like, "Oh my goodness."
Yeah.
And the flies, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was just, ugh, it was so yucky. And I couldn't even imagine. It was just disgusting.
We should call the mutton broth the substance because that was
Oh,
really the most horrible thing. Yeah,
I ugh. It's like I could smell it through my TV screen.
yeah. Yeah, I thought top to bottom, the cast was great, and they really
Yes.
executed this film beautifully.
Yeah, no, I thought they all did really, really well.
So the story in The Legend of Lizzie Borden moves very quickly and decisively. The film is, I think, under an hour and a half, which most TV films were at that time.
Mhm,
And it gives us a multi-layered depiction of the mysterious figure of Lizzie Borden. In depicting the actual trial, director Paul Winkos relied on testimony that was documented at the actual real life trial. He was able to find written testimony and was able to incorporate that into the script. So that adds a lot of authenticity to what occurred in the movie. The Legend of Lizzie Borden does take some liberties, though, with the real life story. As we said earlier, the movie unquestionably depicts Borden as the killer, even though she was acquitted at trial. And there are some historians who say that there's not enough evidence to indicate that she was the killer. Others would disagree. Um, they could have left it vague, but Winkos decided to go in a different direction. So that's a little bit of straying from reality, but
mhm,
understandable that you would do that in a film of this nature. If you look at made for TV horror films from the 1970s, and there were many good ones, we talked about Salem's Lot earlier, Crowhaven Farm, you think about The Night Stalker, The Night Strangler,
right.
lots of memorable films. The Legend of Lizzie Borden doesn't get talked about as much, but it's one of the best of these. It's one of the best of that subgenre.
Mhm,
If you look at this movie, it looks like a theatrical release more than a TV film. Its graphic nature was kind of shocking and really ahead of its time for that era. And it's a movie we watch 50 years later. It still holds up as a very compelling piece of storytelling, even though it's many years later. So I think this is an outstanding film. It's very well done, and it's one of those movies that has held up for 50 years and probably will hold up very well for another 50 years. One of my favorites from the made for TV genre. I give it 3.5 stars. Tracy, what do you think?
Oh, nice. You know what, Bruce? I never even gave it a thought about, like some of the scenes in that movie, like the the blood and the kind of the killings in that movie. I guess really you wouldn't see that in 1975.
No.
So that's actually a really excellent point. I never even thought about that. Overall, I like the movie. I thought it was a great, especially made for TV film. It felt like it was a theatrical movie, like you mentioned. It was also a pretty decent history lesson about like a folklorish type story that we've all heard of. And yeah, even though it took liberties, um, but for me, again, I did extra research just because I found it kind of interesting. I wanted to know more about Lizzie Borden and what the actual story was. I'd give it 3 stars. It's definitely worth a watch, and, chances are it's gonna be something I'm gonna watch again because, I really enjoyed it, and I really liked Elizabeth Montgomery.
Yeah, she was definitely one of my favorites. She sadly ended up dying relatively young. She developed
Mhm,
cancer, passed away in the early 1990s. We do tend to remember her for Bewitched, but she also appeared in The Twilight Zone.
mhm,
And she had quite a good career as a film actress as well, and really deserves to be remembered not just as a comic actress, but as a serious actress who could handle uh, dramatic, serious roles like this one. And when you're
mhm.
playing someone who many believe was a killer, that's about as serious as it gets. And she handles it just beautifully.
Yeah.
Really good movie.
Bruce, what was the name of the film? It was an older film that she had starred in. I have not been able to find it anywhere. Was it Satan's Daughter? Do you recall what that movie was from back in the '70s that she was in?
A made for TV movie?
I think it was a made-for-TV movie.
Well,
I
she
know we
called The Victim.
Oh, The Victim. Maybe that was it.
which
Okay.
I actually just got as a birthday gift from my wife and daughter, but I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
Yeah. That came out I wanna say that came out around 1972,
Okay.
so it came out before The Legend of Lizzie Borden,
Mhm.
and it's gotten good reviews. And I remember we talked about made for television films a while back on
That's
this
right.
very podcast, and that was, I think, one of the movies that we discussed. So that might be the
Yes.
movie, that you're thinking of.
I think it was.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Interesting. I have to put that on my watch list.
yeah. But she did a number of feature movies. I mean, not as much during the Bewitched years because she was so busy with the day-to-day filming of that show
Mhm.
that there was a bit of a gap. But she did make The Victim in '72. And then she actually appeared in a string of TV films after that, and I have them here in front of me. 1973, Mrs. Sundance, 1974, Case of Rape, then The Lizzie Borden in 1975, another made-for-TV movie, Dark Victory in '76, and then another one, A Killing Affair in '77,
Oh,
and
wow.
then she also did a TV miniseries in '78 called The Awakening Land. Now, it's not to say that all of her movies were made for TV, but it was obviously a genre she was very comfortable with, and she did end up making a number of films within that subgenre, a couple of which would definitely be classified as horror, The Victim
Mhm.
and The Legend of Lizzie Borden. So it was
Nice.
quite a good career. She continued to act really up until the early to mid 1990s when she did pass away. She was not that old. She was 62. She passed away in 1995 after a real struggle with cancer. But very fine actress,
Mhm.
and I think one who deserves to be remembered for more than just Bewitched. As great as she was in Bewitched, there was a lot more to Elizabeth Montgomery than that. And this movie, The Legend of Lizzie Borden, certainly serves as an example. Well, that's going to wrap things up for the show, Tracy. I want to thank you for your thoughts both on The Substance and The Legend of Lizzie Borden. You gave 3 stars to each one. I went 3 stars for The Substance, 3.5 for Lizzie. But thanks for helping us out this past hour.
Oh, it's been fun. And, I thank you every single time because, you give me that extra push to watch films I may or may not typically watch. So thank you.
I forced you to watch these movies. I absolutely put lots of pressure on you to make you do this. That
No,
way
it's
we don't have to make things up during the show.
positive encouragement. You should watch this show.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Tracy. Appreciate it. Thanks to Tracy. Our thanks to all of our listeners as well. We're very glad that you could join us in this Museum of the Macabre. And we do hope you'll join us again next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.